All right, welcome to a conversation about sons and fathers. My name is Farron Dozier. I am a retired Army Sergeant First Class, 24 years military, and now I'm on the journey, life after my service, to impact the conversation that I see as important. Sometimes we look at father and son relationships, and that's like one of the biggest, conversations around that. But have we ever talked about a perspective of a son to a father? And so today, I'm honored to have Andy and his son Jonathan join me in this conversation. A little bit about my background. Um, I'm 51 years old. This conversation is uh, generated from my own experiences with my dad. And when I was 5 years old, it was Christmas. And I was on the floor playing with my toys. And I looked up and I said, "Hey, where's my dad?" And somebody in the room said, "Oh, he's gone." And as a 5 year old, I can remember that like it was yesterday. And I can remember my brain saying, like, why did he leave? Like, where did he go? And I made it mean that he didn't love me. And so can you imagine a 5 year old child playing on the floor, looking for his dad, doesn't see him, and I write a script from that moment that says my dad doesn't love me. Now, I didn't understand that at 5, but as I grew up, there was something in the way of me and my dad's relationship that just was like, I describe it as a wedge. Like I loved him. He felt more like my brother, but I did love him and I respected him as my dad, but there was something in the way of that connection. And we would do our best to spend time. We would go play pool, and maybe within like an hour or so in the game, I start talking about my life and what I'm dealing with. And then he would say, "Well, if I was you, I would do this." And it would make me so mad. I would like my blood would boil and I'd be like, "How do you know? Like, you don't know nothing. You never been in the military. You never been married. How do you know?" And I would be so upset with him that I would be like, "You know what? Forget it. I don't even want to play no more. Let's go." And I would pack up the pool balls, drive home in silence, and then I drop them off. But on my way home, I'd be like, "Why can't I connect with my dad? Like, I want to spend time with this guy, but we're just not, like, he gets on my nerve." And this is all my internal dialogue. I've never opened my mouth and said this out loud. This is just all my internal dialogue. And then maybe that argument that I created would last a week or 2 weeks or 6 months or maybe a year that we won't talk. And then one day I would call and say, "Hey, you want to play pool again?" "Oh, yes." And he would right away, like, "How you been, son? I miss you. I want to talk to you." And so we would start all over again. And maybe this time it would be fine and we could make it through the pool game. Or this time, maybe again, I go off on him. And so I was invited to take this class called Landmark Education. And I sat there and I heard some conversations about relationships with fathers and sons to mothers and us as human beings to our peers. But that one conversation about my dad at 40 years old brought up that story that I just shared with you. Now that's 35 years that I lived like that I had gained proof in the world. The times that my dad would call me and tell me he would come pick me up and he wouldn't show, or he would say that he would come and see me and he wouldn't come. And so I had all this proof that, man, this guy doesn't love me because of the way he's behaving. And that's what I made it mean. And it never really gave him a space to show up as my father, only as how I thought I knew of him. And at 40 years old, I dissected that story I just shared with you, and I saw something that was missing. Not right or wrong or good or bad, but was missing. And what was missing toward me to my dad was compassion, acknowledgement, gratitude. And so from that point on, I called my dad and I said, "Hey, Dad, I love you. Thank you for teaching me how to tie my shoe. Thank you for taking me to McDonald's and Wiener Schnitzel and coloring on the big Superman coloring book. And I just watching the airplanes land. Like I just thanked him for taking me to the drive-ins, all the things that I could remember that I was thankful for from my dad. I told him. And I said, you know what, Dad, by the way, I made up a story about you. And I realized that it wasn't the truth. It was just my view of you. And so when I explained to him that story, all he said was, I love you, son. I just want to spend time with my son. And so from that day, only 10 years ago, I committed to be compassionate, gratitude, and acknowledgement with my dad. So even though I would still get frustrated when we would talk, and he never changed, but I changed how I listened to him. And so instead of getting upset and angry and frustrated and my skin still boiling, I would be like, you know what, Dad, why would you recommend that? Thank you for saying that. Now tell me, why would you do life like that? Why would you be like that? What would make you do that? And sometimes he didn't even have an answer. Sometimes he would stutter and be like, well, I just, underneath all of that was just him expressing his love. And when I heard how he grew up with his father, and then it made sense. I was born in 1970. So when I was born, he was 20 years old, almost 21. My mom was 19. So it's like, what do they know about life at 19 and 21? Like, me and your dad could look now in our life and be like, what did I know about life in my teens and 20s, even in my 30s? Like, very little that I knew about life itself. And so, as I shared off camera, in 2019, I was at TV broadcasting school, and I got a phone call from my dad's caregiver that she found him unresponsive. And it was like a dream. I didn't believe it. And so the police called me and they said, are you his son? I said, yes. They said, well, you need to come so you can view the body. And I was like, I'll come after I get out of school. They were like, no, you need to come now. And so I drove to his apartment in Hollywood, and he had passed away. But I'm grateful that this conversation that I shared with you from 2011 up until the day he passed away, I forgave him and he forgave me. And our relationship was connected. All those things that I thought that were negative about him for all those 35 plus years, I saw that there wasn't. It was just him trying to express his love the best way that he knew how, and what he learned from his dad. And fortunately, my dad took those same classes a year and a half before he passed away, and he was able to unpack some of his life experiences with his own father, who was passed away in 96, and holding on to his grandparents who had passed away in the 80s. And so my dad was free from his childhood and his things about life that he thought was so true about life. And then that expanded our relationship even more. So can you imagine that last year of his life, of us just connecting and sharing and showing love and just joy and peace in all of our conversations? And so when I look at that, and I look at when I saw that he passed away, in my space of thinking about him, there was no regrets. There was no resentments. I had said everything that I needed to say to him, even though I didn't get to talk to him before he passed away in his sleep. Now, my mind tried to trick me and tell me, but you didn't talk to him over the weekend, because I was doing homework that weekend, and that was normal. We would go a couple of days without talking. So it wasn't like I was mad or he was mad. I was doing homework. But my mind still tried to put something in there that says, you didn't talk to him on Saturday or Sunday. But then I looked at it when I found his phone. He passed away sometime between Saturday and Sunday morning. So even if I called him on Saturday, he wasn't going to answer the phone. Even if I called him on Sunday, he wasn't going to answer the phone. So I had to catch how I was thinking about my dad and those regrets that tried to surface. And I said, no, there's nothing there in my space that wants me to think that I have something against my dad. No. But that took a lot of work and a lot of practice and a lot of developing myself as a person. And I've been blessed to make it through that situation and we were going to do this conversation together. However, he's not here, but he's in my heart, and he is a part of this conversation, which is why I feel that I could still have this to share our experiences, and then maybe pass that to another son and father so they could see if there's something that might be what I learned recently, a strain. Maybe not nothing that's traumatic, but maybe there's a strain. There's something that could be a little thing that doesn't connect you to your dad. And it's not that it's a spiritual piece for this conversation, but it is for me, because the Bible talks about honoring our father and mother. And the Bible says you don't have to like your dad or like your mother, but it's how you think about them. It's how you talk about them is where your freedom is. Because sometimes we just don't get along with our parents for whatever reason. But that's okay. That's just the part of being human. But the real work is, what is your inner saying to yourself about your parents? And that's what I learned, that if we talk from that point, then life opens up. And maybe there's some peace that you get a glimpse of peace of mind that you could see, like, you know what, maybe I'm not mad at what happened between my parents or what's going on with my dad or my mom. Maybe that's just part of being an adult, and that I can have a life that I choose for myself, not based of what they went through. Because a lot of times as parents, we have our concerns about our children. Like, your dad is concerned about you. Like, and that concern is from love, because he's trying to make sure you get everything you need to be a stand-up guy. And it may seem like he's overbearing or whatever that thing is, that how you language it to him. But really underneath all of that is love. Because if he didn't talk to you about those things, he wouldn't care what happened to you. But the thing is about parents, what we don't see is that our concerns about our children is not our children's concerns about them. So I have my concerns about my daughters, and my daughters have their concerns about their life. And sometimes my concerns for them is not the same as that they have for themselves. So what I had to do was I had to put my concerns aside and say, hey, what are you dealing with in life? What matters to you? What do you care about? And then listen and let them tell me, hey, this is what I'm worried about. This is what scares me. This is what my concerns are. And instead of putting my concerns on them, which will make them look like they're rebelling, because they're going to tell me, you're not listening to me, Dad. You're not listening. You're not listening to what I'm saying. And we do that because we put our concerns on our children. But there is a way that we could listen from the child's concern and then help the child in life with those concerns and help them navigate what they're worried about. And by doing that as parents, that adds a different level of connection, because now there's no rebellion, because now I'm not forcing, like, I'm trying to keep you safe, but what's safe for you and yourself may not be what's safe. So I have to find out, what do you need to be safe in the world? And that's a different conversation. A lot of times as parents, we don't know that. I had to learn that. But I just learned that 10 years ago. So I've been able to make my correction with my daughters and help reestablish my relationship. My oldest daughter, she talks to me, but she's very disappointed in me. My middle daughter, we're like, okay. And my youngest daughter, I've been able to make those corrections. So I'm still growing as a parent. I'm still doing this exact same work that I'm sharing with you. But for this conversation, in this context, it's the son to a father. And that was really what spun my life into a space where my relationships failed. I didn't have a lot of male friends. I didn't trust a lot of people. And so healing that with my dad opened up a space for me to now connect with men on a different level, to trust. So at the same time, it had been in my heart to write a book about my life. Like, we all have this conversation we want to share. And so I wanted to talk about my military career. I have an inherited gene called sickle cell trait. Sickle cell trait is a red blood cell condition. That inherited gene actually caused me to collapse in the military, and I almost died from what they call sickle cell trait exertion. So if you've seen on TV, athletes and military personnel have been dying playing football or exercising in the military. I had that same experience, except I didn't have the heart attack and die. But I had the condition called rhabdomyolysis, which is a skeletal muscular disorder. So my muscles leaked out negative um, myoglobin, which is negative, which is muscle tissues, plus the negative toxins that's stored in the muscles, and that triggered my kidneys to fail because those toxins become problems with the kidneys, so the kidneys start to shut down. So I was having renal failure, and I had serious muscle damage, and the military found me not fit for service after I tried to get better, and they medical retired me, and that's what forced me out of the military. And then I became an advocate for that gene that almost killed me. So I'm on this quest for my purpose in life to share about sickle cell trait and sickle cell disease, because millions of people have this gene, and a lot of people don't know the risk factors.
It's high amongst the Black community, if I remember correctly.
Yes, so we African Americans, we are number one because it fights malaria. So it does have a purpose in life. So in those parts of the country where malaria is present, that's how those races of people survived. However, because we're all blended now, but you could be Mediterranean, European, Caucasian, Asian descent. It's no longer just a color. Now people have to know their ancestors and where their ancestors are from, because now anybody could have this inherited gene because we're all blended and mixed from our ancestors.
Right.
So it's very important for people to find out by taking a test, a blood test, to find out.
So I'm going to ask you to, I guess, start asking my son and I whatever it is that you want to do. But
yes. So based off of the conversation that I had, I want to start with you, Andy. What was it like for you growing up as a child with your parents?
My situation was very different. I came to Canada as a refugee with my mother, my brother, and my sister.
Mm-hmm.
No dad. And then when my dad came back into the picture, or tried to come back into the picture, when I was, I think, 7 or 8 years old, my mom basically shut the door to that. She never explained why. She did what I find a lot of women sadly do. If the man doesn't want you, then she cuts off the kids. Mm-hmm. And it's very common, I find, in the USA and Canada, where the women have virtually all the rights, all the parental rights, and men have nothing.
Right.
I discovered later on that she had actually blocked him from ever coming to Canada again. He reached out to me when I was an adult. He found me through my uncle, who passed on the message, and I called him. It was difficult because not only did we have a time gap, we also had a language gap, because I grew up in Canada, so my ability to speak Cantonese was limited. I grew up in a small town. I didn't grow up in a major metropolitan area like a lot of other Chinese do. So my ability to speak Cantonese was severely limited.
Yeah.
But even still, as an adult, what ended up happening is that because of what my mom had put in my brain and had told me and implied and led me to believe, and never corrected me on anything that I said negatively, I never really gave him a chance.
So with that, as a young child, how did you think about your dad? Like, how did that make you feel as far as not having your dad around?
I didn't really think a lot about it. A lot of my young childhood was more survival. So when you're just trying to survive, you don't really think about that. Only times I would think about it was on Father's Day, when there'd be events and I have no father.
Yeah. So right there, how did you feel on Father's Day? Like, what was your experience of that?
I just tried to avoid it. I literally had to. I remember being an adolescent, and I remember going to the teacher and saying, "I'm not going to be here for the next 3 days." And she's like, "What?" I said, "Because every year you do the stupid Father's Day thing for crafts. I don't have a dad to give it to, so why am I wasting my time?"
Yeah.
And she was so dumbfounded. She didn't know what to say. In fact, she didn't say anything. So I just didn't show up to school for 3 days. No phone call to home, nothing. I don't even remember what I did. I think I basically pretended to go to school, and went back home and watched TV all day long. Just so that, or if it was a case where I didn't have to worry about my mom being at home or knowing that I was not going to school, I just wouldn't go to school. There's no point.
When you said survival mode, right? So like what kind of teenager or child did you have to become to survive that? My father's not around. Did you have to like feel like you had to grow up faster? Did you feel like you had to be responsible for the family? Like, what was that? If you can
I'm the
articulate
youngest,
that.
so I not that pressure. The pressure fell primarily on my older brother, who was essentially my father figure as well. He ended up passing away when he was just 21, and I was 15 at the time, so 6-year gap. That was hard, but yeah, as far as growing up, I was peeling the carrots and cooking the rice when I was 5 years old. I was doing like all the vegetable prep. So no knives, but there was a peeler, no problem. No open stoves, so a rice cooker, no big deal. By the time I was 10, I was doing my own laundry. Had my first job when I was 8. Didn't have a curfew. Basically, so long as my grades were decent and there's no phone calls home, nothing happened.
How do you feel that played out in your teenage years?
Basically, a lot of it was just me surviving, and then my mother remarried to my stepfather, who they are still together now. He came in and he tried to make me a kid, and I'm like, yeah, what?
Yeah.
Like curfew? Like what's that? Like,
yeah.
Like not that I was ever out late anyways, but it's amazing how if someone who tries to, whether it's your parents or any authority figure who you feel doesn't have any authority over you,
right.
try to place the rules on you. They're like, nah, I wasn't breaking the rule before, but I am now.
Right.
But, and at the end of the day, it did make me into the way I became a parent. I'll wrap up the father side and leave some airtime to my son so you can ask him questions and he can have some thoughts put into this. This meeting has no longer has a time limit. All right, something just popped up on the screen. I thought
Zoom was cutting off. On me.
So, anyways, I was 35 when I had a chance to actually try to see my dad. I had an awesome opportunity to go to Hong Kong at no cost to me, which was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
It was a colleague of mine had been in the top 100 out of over 4,500 advisors. Because I had helped him with his book of business, he invited me as a reward. He said, I basically won this award partly because of your help. So if you want to go, it's paid for. I'm like, all right. So my father being in Hong Kong, and that's the last I had heard of him. Sadly, though, when I reached out to my uncle and I said, hey, look, I'm going to Hong Kong. Are you still in contact with my dad? I think I'm ready to find out his side of the story. Mm-hmm. And sadly, my uncle said, no, he passed away.
Wow.
So I never had a chance to really find out if he was the asshole my mom made him out to be, or if it was just a jilted mother, jilted lover, I guess, who couldn't accept that she wasn't wanted for whatever reason. So to this day, I don't really know all the details. The only thing I do know is that my thoughts are that what she told me can't all be true because I caught her in so many other lies that had nothing to do with him.
Right.
Had to do with me and my siblings.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I've really tried hard to do, and I find that sometimes I may, and I'm not sure if my kids will say this, whether my son or my daughter will say this, but I find that sometimes I explain too much because since nothing was explained to me, I tend to explain to the point where my daughter has said to me at times, okay, Dad, I get it. All right. I just want to make sure because I don't want to leave anything up to being guessed at. I don't want I don't want things to be left out and they come to their own assumptions. I want them to know this is how I feel. This is why I do what I do. And if you have any questions, ask me, because I know for myself, my biggest thing that I've said to both my kids in the past is that where my rooftop ends is where your basement begins.
Yeah. And so what does that mean? What does that really mean? Because my dad was full of cliches, right? So that's like a cliche to me. So what is the meat and potatoes about that you're saying to them?
What I'm basically saying is that wherever I finish, I'm basically their foundation, right? So wherever my building ends, that's where their basement, that's where their foundation for life will be. So whatever I accomplish, whatever knowledge I have, I'm passing on to them, whether they want it or not. And sometimes they don't want it, but I try to push on them that, look, some things you don't want, or it's not that important, but some things you do need to know.
Yeah.
And so those things I'm adamant about. Actually, today was a prime example. John, you didn't want to go to work, but I forced you.
Yeah.
And I know he wasn't happy with me last night, but it's like, you just started working there. You can't take a sick day that early. I mean,
yeah,
especially during COVID and everything else, they would be scrambling to try to find someone, and to try to call in sick when you just started, that's not a good view. And so that was something I was adamant about. He wasn't happy about it, and he probably still isn't happy about it. Yeah. Hopefully in 30 years from now, he will be. So
yeah. And Jonathan, I could relate to your dad from my parents. And one of those things is I didn't really learn about consequences growing up, right? So we want to make these decisions in life, but we don't really look at, okay, if I decide to do this, like, what's the consequence? And from what I hear your dad saying is, by you just starting that job, the consequence of you not showing up could be you losing that job. And that does, I'm sure that's not what he wanted. And I'm sure that's not what you wanted. But a lot of times as parents, like I said, we have our concerns about our children, and we kind of make sure when we talk to you and groom you or guide you, because we know what that's like in the long run, that if you miss work from a new job, you might not have a job when you try to go back to work. And so I'm sure he was just trying to protect you from that aspect. So lastly, Andy, before I let you go, have you healed with your, could you say that you've healed with your mom and dad?
I don't know if heal is the right word. I've just come to accept that there will always be situations where you might have questions where there's no answers.
Exactly.
And you just know that's life.
Exactly.
Instead of trying to chase answers for questions that you have, you just move on and focus on. I really try to focus on things I can control, and things that are not hanging over my head don't affect me anymore. Things that are still hanging over my head, those things affect the things I can't control, unfortunately. And I'm trying to do a better job of it.
Yeah.
I know that part of the reason that I want this conversation was someone's just hearing your friends or your family talk to someone else, you get to know them better. And so I'm hoping this way my son John will get to know me better. And through just, I'm not talking to him.
Yeah.
He's hearing me, but I'm not talking actually to you right now. I'm talking to Farron instead.
Yeah. And that's the beauty. And I don't know, and you may know this already, but I would offer, like my dad, he told me he healed with his grandparents who passed away, was he wrote him a letter and he just wrote out what he would say to them that he didn't get a chance to say, and just read it out loud a couple of times. And maybe that might settle some things in your spirit, in your heart as well. But like you said, really, I just learned myself recently, in life, there are some things that just, there is no answer, right? But my dad, when I grew up, my dad would tell me, there's no such thing as I don't know. And if we don't know, we can go to the library and we could look it up. And so I grew up having to have an answer for him when we would communicate. But what that made me become in life was analytical. I analyzed everything because I have to find the answer to everything. So you become analytical. And it worked great in the military as a platoon sergeant, because I had to create these spaces for my soldiers to go and set up and be safe. So it worked excellent in my military career, but it failed me in my relationships because my wife was like, you always analyzed everything. You always want answers. And it was like, well, yeah. And this not until last year, spiritual leader that I listened to, he said the best thing that you could say is I don't know, because there are some things in life that there are just no answers. And I felt
That's the truth.
so free. Like, are you serious? So now I get that, and you're just like, there's just sometimes no answer. So thank you, Andy, for sharing that.
You're welcome.
All right, Jonathan, you ready?
Yeah.
So you've heard me, kind of talk to your dad about his childhood growing up. It's just you and me. He's listening. He's a fly on the wall, eavesdropping. What? How was it for you growing up with your parents?
Well, in the last, like, I'm in high school now, just
Mhm.
finishing my last year. And so ever since I started high school, so basically the last 4 years, like when my dad have been like really close, and a lot of like what you said, like cliches, like a lot of like life advice has been like
Mhm.
implemented into me. Like how last night, talking about the me wanting to like not go to work. Yeah, I didn't really want to go to work, but my dad always like teach me these life lessons, like think about the consequences and stuff. And like for sure I didn't think of the consequences. And um but like a lot of his like life advice is like, now I say to him like sometimes, like a lot of his life lessons and life advice has become my inner thoughts,
Mhm.
like to the point where it's been like taught so many times, and like all those repetitions of it, it's now my thoughts. It's like it's not his advice anymore, it's like my
Mhm.
own personal. So um I for sure like had like earlier when I opened my Chromebook, all like my tabs for like my schoolwork were like gone, and because it got powered off, and I asked my dad if he did it, and he said yeah I did. And I could have just got like mad and just like lost it on him. But you know as I'm growing up, I'm realizing like he told me before, if he tells me that if I make a mistake and I don't know, then he's not going to get mad at me, but he'll
Mhm.
let me know why I made that mistake and how to avoid it. So for the next time, if I do make the mistake, then obviously I knew, and like he has the right to be a little bit mad.
Yeah.
So he didn't know, and I just like told myself like, oh, it's okay. He didn't know, and it's fine because I can just recover the tabs.
Yeah.
So I love his teachings, and just talking to life about me. He always says I'm trying to, like, once I'm done, like his statement of my rooftop is your basement.
Mhm.
A lot of his knowledge that he's acquired over his life is like tremendous, and he always tells me that he's trying to put like the amount of like knowledge of life and skills and strategies, like implement into me as much as he can for the next few years.
Mhm.
As I'm beginning readying up for university, um, for sure, he wants me to be just prepared for
Mhm.
life's milestones and like hurdles.
So how about, let's go back in time a little bit. When you were like, my story starts, I can remember like to being 5 years old. Like, how far back can you remember, growing, in your thoughts?
Um, like what? It's like with my parents and my relationship.
Yeah.
Well, for sure, my relationship with my dad has um increased dramatically. But I remember back in grade school, I for sure was a bit of a troublemaker. Um, and there was a few moments that I'm not too proud of, but
Mhm.
like and me and my dad have really connected the last few years. And before, he would just get mad whenever I did a mistake, but now it's a little more patient.
Mhm.
Like I one time, I was with a friend, and very bad influence on me, and did something that shouldn't have been done, and so later cops arrived and were asking for me, and it was something like like not recognizing those consequences
Mm,
and not just thinking about the details. So I've had like growing up back in grade school, a lot of friends that like were bad influences for me
mhm.
for sure.
Yeah.
And so my relationship with my dad, he just told me like you want to surround yourself with people who are going to benefit you and who aren't going to bring you down, you know.
So that era of those times, the little strain that was on your relationship with your dad was coming from you to him because you were the one doing all the stuff.
Yeah,
All right. So
for
what was that for you? The strain, was it something like if I tell him he's not going to trust me or listen to me, or like, so I like, no, I know my daughter, she's the type that'll ask for forgiveness later. Like she'll go do it and then like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't, like, no, 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 like we need to talk first. So like, what was that for you? Why you didn't have the dialogue skills or the confidence to say, hey dad, this is what I'm going to do? Like, what was that for you?
um yeah, it's like very similar to that, honestly. It's like growing up, I had a sort of fear, I guess. If I did anything wrong, then like I
Mhm.
know for sure I'd get yelled at,
Yeah.
and so it was just more so of a fear than like um you know and like discipline. And so all this life advice that I'm recognizing now as beneficial for me, back then it was more like uh that
Right.
yeah, or like it was I I I looked at it more so as discipline
Yeah.
than actually like just voicing his concerns and trying, like it's not out of like discipline, it's more so out of care and just making sure that like I'm good.
So if you had to think back to that first time that you did something and that he may have yelled at you, like, can you remember like that first episode of like, oh, I can't do that because he gonna yell at me, so I'm just not gonna even say nothing anymore. Like, do you remember that the story about that?
Um, yeah, for sure. Back to like those bad friends who were influencing me.
Yeah.
Um, like as a kid, you don't know any better, and you just like see your parents are like, oh, like okay, I get it, right? So, I said things that I shouldn't have about my dad, and he found out, and that was like probably the first thing that like for sure, like he got really mad at me, and for reason too, for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was like one of the first few things that like
What what
that
what what for you to say those things, like for you, did it give you peace? Like, yeah, my dad's a jerk. My dad gets on my nerve. Like, did that kind of like give you a little confidence in a little way, or like what did that do for you?
I don't think it gave me confidence. It's just more so because of how my friends talked. Like they were saying the same things. So
Mm,
I said that to like, oh yeah, like just to like, fit in, that type of stuff. But like I'm recognizing that as now as like why'd I do that? Like
yeah.
I was plainly stupid, yeah.
Cool deal. So now, so you saying now looking back at 17, the things that your dad has shared with you, the disciplines, um, I can tell you now, I hear my dad's thoughts in my head when I talk to my grandson. So for you now, as you're about to mature or maturing and getting to that next level of life, what do you say about all those teachings today?
Today,
Yeah.
they definitely shaped who I am. You know, um, like a lot of his teachings and even like the small detailed things too. Um, they're just like part of my daily life. Um, everything he teaches me is for like concern for just to make sure that I'm prepared and not repeating the same mistakes as he did when growing up. because like how my dad didn't grow up with a dad, he he wants to be the best dad that he never gotten.
Yeah.
And I can say like with 100% guarantee, like he definitely has. I play a lot of, well, played a lot of basketball um, from grade 7 up until like, this year.
Mhm.
And a lot of, my other teammates, their dads were not to practice, and um, some were not the game. And my dad was always there, and
Mm.
he'd always be at the gym 7 a.m. before school
Mhm.
hour, and just getting those shots up, getting those reps up. And he'd even get tell me to like get my teammates out here to like so we can win this year. And and we actually, in my last year, grade 11, we didn't lose a game like the whole season.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that was all because of like in the summer during like summer league, just getting all my teammates out and stuff, and that was all because of him.
Mm.
And I even knew this two guys actually who went to Division 1 NCAA basketball,
Oh, wow.
and I got trained by them, and that was all through my dad, and he opened up those opportunities for me, and I never really openly say that like how much I really appreciated those things that he's given me. I
Mhm.
don't think I think we as people recognize what our parents do for us like as we mature,
Mhm.
but we just never openly say those things,
Yeah,
and we never give that acknowledgement. And
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
and so my dad has definitely, for me and my sister as well, have given more than what most kids my age have received. And for someone who didn't have a dad, um, I'd say he's done like I'd say he's done God's work. I think is like amazing to how much like he's done for me in the past 4 years with the amount of results it's given. I think it's like amazing.
Yeah. You know, in these last 10 years, and thank you for sharing. I really appreciate you acknowledging your dad, and we're both in tears as parents. Those are the things that I know my dad wanted to hear, and I didn't really understand that. And I was 40 years old when I discovered that. So you can imagine 35 years of not even knowing to acknowledge my father all those years because of how I thought he didn't love me. So that is very valuable, and it's very important for sons to be able to express and have the space to express that to their dad, just as you talk to him as normal stuff. Like all the advice that he gives you, you should, not that you should, but there could be a space where you could be like, and you know what, dad, hey, thank you. Thank you for, I want to thank you today for blah, blah, blah. Not always the survival mode, like we got to make this, life stuff, but a moment to just be like, you know what, hey man, thanks. And so what I would do is I had friends that I would tell them that hadn't talked to their parents, that hadn't talked to their mother or father in like years. I said, look, I challenge you, make a list, write down 10 things that you want to thank your dad for on Father's Day, or you want to thank your mom on Mother's Day. Write those 10 things down, call them, and just say, hey, dad, I want to tell you something. I just want you to listen. And then read the list and then be quiet. And that has enabled children to connect to their parents because the father is growing. The father's like, did I even do a good job? Because the father's like, did I do? And so there's been no acknowledgement from the child saying, dad, you did good. I'm okay. Like everything that you did worked. But sometimes we don't get those kind of conversations. And then what happens if that parent dies? And then that's the resentment and regret that we didn't never get a chance to say, I really loved you. Like, I know I treated you crazy, but I really loved you. And if we could do that before the parent passes, can you imagine the connection that can be established through the rest of both the child's lives? So that is really why I wanted to have this conversation, just to have an example of what it looks like. I know what mine looks like, but I wanted to hear other people's versions of it, because there are things, like you said, as children, that we do stuff and we don't really see it because we're kids, and I want to play. I don't want to do that responsibility stuff. So lastly, even in the mental health world, of statistics say that children, when parents get divorced, the children are impacted, right? And I can tell you, I'm divorced, and I wanted my daughter to make sure that she knew that it wasn't her fault that me and her mother failed, right? And so I stood in as long as I could to make sure she was developed and educated, and could see that it was all on dad and not her. But not all children experience that. Some children make it mean that maybe, what did I do that had the relationship break up? Is there anything you want to speak to that, on how your dad has helped you nurture that part without your mom being there? Do you want to speak into any of that?
Um, yeah, for sure. I I won't lie, currently right now. Like I don't really feel like how you say, like how kids feel like as if it's their fault. And I know that 100% my dad has um gave it his all to like ensure that I realize that, and that he also tried his best too, and that he's sorry for what happened. And I understand that with our situation, that it's not his fault, like for sure it isn't. And but the last 4 years, how I said, he was giving me that life advice, that um all those like cliches, like you said,
Mhm.
he he did it for a reason. And I think it really worked out, because um you know it like seeing it now, it kind of made me who I am, and also strengthened like the relationship between me and him, because now like sometimes I don't even see my dad as a dad, like that's his name, well, not his name, but that's what I call him. But um like just the relationship part of it, like before as a kid you saw a dad as like a authority figure
Yeah.
more so, but like right now I see my dad more so as a mentor and a teacher, and I can still be myself and be comfortable around him.
Mhm.
As a kid, like I said, how that fear,
Yeah.
I wasn't, but now like I am like comfortable around him, like, and whenever I want to talk, I know that I can talk to him. And so when it comes to the divorce aspect of my dad and my mom, I know my dad tried everything that he could, um, and um, I guess I can take this time to say that like despite everything that happened in the last 4 years and at the house, and just dealing with the things you did, that I just want to say that like none of it was your fault, and you don't have to blame yourself or just regret the things that happened between your parents and with my mom, of what happened. um None of it's your fault. Like, you tried everything you could, and but I think it worked out tremendously, focusing on the parenting side, with me and my sister, that now that he needs help, that we're both um qualif not qualified, we're both able to give him the help that he educated us, you know.
Yeah. And it's beautiful that you said that, because as I'm learning more about being a father, like, so with my daughters, I wasn't a father. Like, I was dad. So the father is the source of the family. He's the found like your dad. He is the foundation of the house. But sometimes, like how my dad was with me, I was that way with my daughters. So sometimes I didn't see my daughters because I thought that's just what my dad did. So I thought that was okay. But come to find out, that's not okay. So I'm, like I said, I'm repairing relationship with my own children because how I was parenting, I didn't want to be like my dad, but I end up turning out like my dad because sometimes the things that you resist in life, they persist. So the more I didn't want to be like him, I turned out exactly like him in my own version. And so now I'm cleaning it up. And because I know I can clean it up, like I did with him, I'm giving my daughters the space to now connect back with me and make the corrections. But you can be a parent and not be a father. You can be a dad and not be a father because of what the responsibility of a father is to source. And by him staying in there with you and your sister, all that, that is what a father does, and not just be a parent, right? And so you have definitely demonstrated the love from a father to his son, and I'm glad for you sharing what you shared to the love from you to your father as well in return. So I'm good. If there's anything you want to say to your dad, you're more than welcome to speak to him.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, like, just I like that my dad talked to me about, like just joining this podcast, and um because I think um like being a parent never really stops. Like, your kid's always gonna come asking more and more questions, and you're just, you're always gonna like help and do the best you can. And as parents, I know for sure that, as parents, especially, in a like a divorce situation, that they never want to hurt the kid.
Mhm.
They don't really, they never intend the hurt. They just want to make sure that the kid succeeds in life.
Mhm.
And some parents just have problem demonstrating that, and some have a hard time just teaching them, um, and there's no formula for really being a parent, and there's no set step by step. There's just, you just have to try everything and anything that you can, um, because being a parent is, um, prioritizing your child, and just number one, just making sure that, like my dad says, is that making sure that your rooftop starts is their basement.
Yeah. And lastly, I'm going to share with you, there was a gap that I didn't see my dad from 8 to 15. And what I found out at 46 was my mom had told my dad, he gave him an ultimatum. And he had told my dad that he didn't want me in that environment that he was living. So my dad would tell me he couldn't tell me that. So he would just be like, well, I'll come and see you, but never showed. But it was because him and my mother had this back behind the scenes conversation, so he couldn't see me. And I'm like, why didn't y'all just tell me what was going on? Because for those 8 years, I made up my own story about my dad, which is why I saw it wasn't true. So sometimes as parents, my mom, she wanted to protect me, which I understood. But in the moment of those 8 years, I had wrote this whole script about my dad that if they would have been honest with me and told me at that age, when I got older, I would have understood it as we get older. But because no one said nothing to me, I had made it my own story. And so I just want to say that because sometimes as parents, we do our best, like your dad's mom. She tried to, whatever she did, she tried to protect her children, but sometimes it come across as what is like is it doesn't look like protection in the moment. And so sometimes those things happen, and maybe whatever happened between your dad and your mom is the same thing that your dad tried to protect you and your sister. So a lot of times we don't understand it as children because, like you said, we don't know what it is to be an adult. And so it gives you and your dad and your sister a space to get connected and still maintain that relationship. So Andy, before we go, What you got, man?
Well, I'm glad that this forum was created from a Facebook group for dads. You're not
Thank
connected,
you.
and it's kind of nice to hear all the stuff from John, because I wondered sometimes, right? So kind of having him tell me, which it's weird how for most men we don't really have great communication skills. I've been really fortunate and blessed to always have been around things like Zig Ziglar, Jim Rohn, Les Brown,
Yeah.
Brian Tracy,
Mm-hmm.
all communication focused, right?
Yeah.
So I think that my communication skills are pretty decent, because I don't think that I would have the relationship I have with John and his sister if I didn't have that before. But even with all that, I don't think John and I have ever really talked the way that we did right now, like him just saying everything.
Yeah.
So I think this might be a great podcast series for you. Like literally try to find other men in the group who have older kids who are 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, whatever, who are willing to be on a podcast like this, because you might find out things about each other that literally my son and I live in a small place. He's like, we've been living together, just the two of us now for a year and change, no one else. And there's times where we don't communicate like that. So just having that third party sometimes helps, because then it's not your son asking you questions, it's someone else asking you questions, and it's not your dad asking you questions, it's someone else, right? So I think at the end of the day, it's all about what are you trying to do to improve yourself, and what are you doing to leave the world a better place. And I know those sounds like cliches, but if you actually live by them, and because I've seen some of the stuff that John, you've done, like where you've influenced some of your friends who are on the, I shouldn't say on the edge, but that could be influenced by other people poorly. I've seen you influence them positively, and so that's something that makes me proud, because I mean, anytime that your kid does something great, it makes you proud about it, right? So.
And I don't know if
do you have any?
I don't know if it's okay to say, but you did say that you see your son as more mature than some men. Do you want to elaborate on that part?
Oh yeah. When I look at the like grown men, like there's one guy, he's 40 years old, and he still talks like he's a frat boy. And I understand why, because his dad was never there for him. His dad is like, if you ever watched on Netflix The Ranch with Ashton Kutcher, if you watch that, like the dad in that TV series on Netflix is my friend's dad. So I understand why he's so immature, because his dad never actually took the time to do anything. So in a way, having a blank slate for a father meant that not only did I not have a good influence in my life, I also didn't have a negative influence. So when it came to deciding what kind of father I was going to be, it was easier for me to really focus on, okay, these are all things I wish I had in a dad. And so that's what I did for my kids. And I do find that a lot of things that I've done with my kids, most people are usually shocked that they are as young as they are. I remember a couple of years ago, I took my son to a networking event, and people who run into me since then, they'll say, "Oh yeah, your son is so charming. He's so on stage." I believe that our kids and anyone that we're around will end up 100% living up to whatever expectations set for them. So if you set high expectations and you do your best to lay out, this is the best way that I know how to do it. If you follow it, great. If you don't, that's fine. Yeah. So I've told my kids this a few times and I think it's worked. I'll tell them, look, here's the ways that I know work. Okay, this works. That doesn't. If you don't want to do it my way, that's fine. but definitely this way will never work.
You're like, don't go that way at all.
I mean, if you don't want to go my way, that's fine. That's not a problem. You can do your own way, whichever way you want.
Yeah.
But this other way over here, out in left field, no. That way was guaranteed not to work. You can do so. As far as offline before today's podcast, when we were talking yesterday, I mentioned how to my son at 17 is much more mature than most of his peers, because a lot of his peers, they've never had any education, they've not had any training, any exposure. I mean, my son was exposed to Toastmasters at age 12.
Oh wow.
He's been exposed to high level speakers. So I think the speaker that he listened to was Janine Driver. She's the FBI agent or ex-FBI agent who was part of the Waco negotiations.
Oh, okay.
Waco, Texas, remember that?
Oh yeah.
That craziness.
Oh yeah.
So, by exposing my son to high level things, he's more likely to be high level. I mean, that's why people who go to Harvard, they have networks, and they have this high level group of networks that they can draw upon and knowledge. So I think the reason why my son is the way he is that I've worked so hard to try to give him all the knowledge and experience that I didn't have growing up. I've told him and my daughter this many times, and it's amazing how if you say something often enough. So LeVar Ball spoke things into existence. I ended up doing similar things because I remember Facebook memories popped up, and basically it was I expected that my kids will achieve more at the same age. My daughter has done that. At 23 years old, she is now an RPN, which is a registered practical nurse. The US version is a licensed practical nurse, LPN.
Okay, yeah.
She's on her way to becoming an RN now. And she has an amazing boyfriend. He's an engineer who works in the US, in Windsor, so it's a nice little commute.
Oh yeah.
So I truly believe that things that I tell my kids, I tell them things often enough, especially positive things, they will make it happen. So one of my goals right now is I want to be able to give them 45 years of knowledge and give it to the 17-year-old version, right? The 18-year-old version, 23-year-old version. Because I firmly believe that if he does all the things that I have knowledge and he applies it, he can quite honestly be fully retired by 35. Guaranteed, if he just follows all the steps. How many people can have that mindset that I could be retired at 35? I just need to do this stuff.
Yeah.
So that's why I think my son is a lot more mature than most kids, because I've been around him so much that I've basically given him, paraphrasing, Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, Anthony Robbins. These are all people I've actually met face to face.
Yeah.
Right? And I've shook their hands and managed to get the nuggets of advice over and above the seminars that they're doing. Yeah. So most kids who are 17 don't get that.
Yeah.
So I believe that for yourself, as you're, I think you said you're 51.
I'll be 51 this year. Yeah, a few months.
Fair?
In March, I'll be.
So you'll be 51. I'll be 46. Okay, so we're essentially 5 years apart.
Yeah.
So I firmly believe that if we go in the mindset of that, if we can give all our knowledge to our kids and they can do whatever they want with it afterwards,
yeah,
they will have tools that we didn't have growing up, and we can step back and take a lot of pride in, hey, they're where they are because I broke the cycle.
And that's exactly that's exactly how I look at it now, because I learned now that we can teach our youth how to think, but not what to think, because they're going to think for themselves, for their own life. As I shared with you, they got their own worries in life. But if we give the youth the tools on how to think, then they'll be successful in whatever they choose to take on in life. And so, Jonathan, I just want to check with you, all that adult knowledge that your dad has passed to you, do you still feel like a kid sometimes, or do you feel like I got to grow up? It's like, so how does that impact you?
I guess I balance it,
Okay.
like sometimes my dad um, he still tells me like he likes to remind me that like I'm still a kid and I should enjoy that, right? Because um, it's like when you're in the adult world, it's a lot of responsibilities.
Mhm.
And I think that's tying back to that parents and protecting their kid when they're younger, not telling them things until later in life, is to protect that childhood and keep that ignorance so that way they can still live their childhood like how a normal kid
Exactly.
should.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, for sure. So there are some moments where I'm like, I have to go up, I have to go real quick because as I'm going into university, it's like there's like a lot of things coming my way, and I'm just like, I have to be ready, I have to be ready, and I'm just so focused
Yeah.
that I don't take a moment and just pause and just think like it will work out. Just be patient.
Exactly. Hey, I want to thank both of you for taking this hour to speak with me. Andy, this happened just, and I'm going to tell you, be honest with you, I didn't know how to pose my question in the men's group because I didn't want to get kicked out. So I'm like, how can I phrase my question so I could ask, because I want to, like, I see all the stuff that's in those groups and it's like, oh my gosh, like we need some support in here. So I'm like, how
Yeah.
can I pose a question where the administrator doesn't give me the boot? And so I figured I prayed on it and I wrote down stuff as you saw in the post, like, okay, let me frame it to where it's not like, you know, I'm not trying to do anything out of the ordinary. Just, I want to have a conversation with the people in here. And so I
Yeah.
thank you for reading that and responding. And for those men who watched this that did read those posts in that group as well, thank you for responding. Some people did respond. And so I'm grateful that you two have allowed me to see that what I want to do with my life of a 5-year-old to share with sons to fathers. Jonathan, you just demonstrated that relationship, and so I'm very grateful for your time as well. So, any last words, or we can get out of here?
Um, I think I'm good. I just want to say thank you for being on your podcast, and this does it has really helped.
Do you feel a sense of freedom now after before you sat down?
Um, I guess a little bit. Like for sure, like the last, as my semester for school is ending and like a lot of, assignments are, just wrapping up and, just like the stress and, COVID and New Year 2021, just like all these
Mm-hmm.
things happening around me. It's nice to have, something like this exactly to just, like slow it down and just take a moment to
Put it in a
breathe.
different perspective, huh?
Yeah.
Cool deal. Well, I'm grateful for your time again. I'm gonna let you go. Again, this is Farron Dozier, Sergeant First Class, retired Army. My next journey after my military service is life of a 5-year-old, and the next one I'm writing right now is life of an 8-year-old, which is how I healed with my mom just in the last 90 days for the last 10 years. So, but this first piece is dedicated to my dad, Ronald Smith. I love him. I still love him, and the words that you hear are some of the things that he taught me. And so, if you want to be a part of this, farrond.com is where everything is listed at, and my social media is Farron Dozier at Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook. So I'm grateful, and hopefully someone else would like to share their story with me. And let's do this, as Andy mentioned, this is what I see can help the next generation, which is no cliche. Like, they are our future in real time. And so these conversations, I think, especially with our fathers, connecting them with their children, that could disappear a lot of the crime, a lot of the just drug issues, because a lot of these people who are demonstrating these symptoms are upset with their father. A lot of it is driven because of they didn't have their father in their life. And maybe we can shift that conversation with that son to see what his dad was going through just as much as what he's going through right now. And so that's my goal. I'm very grateful. Farrond.com, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.